The first snows of winter had begun to dust the Wyoming territory like flour on a baker's board. Caleb Ward pulled his collar higher against the biting wind as his horse. Dusty picked their way down the rutted trail toward Sagebrush Crossing. The town sat in a valley between two ridges, smoke from chimneys rising straight up in the still morning air before the wind caught it and scattered it across the gray sky. Caleb had made this ride countless times over the past 15 years, but today felt different. Maybe it was the ache in his bones that reminded him he wasn't the young buck who'd first claimed his quarter section of land. At 38, he'd seen enough winters to know this one promised to be harsh. The elk were already moving to lower ground, and the wolves had been howling closer to the settlements than usual. He shifted in the saddle, his weathered hands steady on the reins despite the cold. The leather creaked familiarly beneath him, a sound that had become as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. Out here, a man and his horse were often the only company each other had for weeks at a time, and Caleb preferred it that way. People meant complications. People meant questions he didn't want to answer and memories he'd rather leave buried. The town appeared gradually through the morning haze. First came the church steeple, then the false fronts of Main Street, and finally the scattered houses and corrals that marked the edges of civilization. Sagebrush Crossing wasn't much to look at, maybe 300 souls on a good day, but it served its purpose. A man could get supplies, hear whatever news was worth knowing, and disappear back to his land without too much fuss. Caleb guided Dusty toward Murphy's general store, nodding to the few early risers already about their business. Old Pete Hawkins was sweeping the boardwalk in front of his barber shop, and the widow Morrison was hanging laundry despite the threatening sky. They acknowledged him with the brief gestures of people who recognized a neighbor but knew better than to expect conversation. Inside Murphy's, the warmth hit him like a wall. The pot-bellied stove in the center of the store glowed cherry red, and the smell of coffee mixed with leather goods, pickles, and lamp oil. Tom Murphy looked up from his ledger, his round face breaking into a merchant's smile. "Caleb Ward, haven't seen you in near 2 months. Figured you might have gotten snowed in already." "Not yet," Caleb replied, pulling a list from his coat pocket. "Need to stock up before it hits proper." As Murphy began gathering the items, flour, beans, coffee, ammunition, lamp oil, Caleb became aware of a conversation near the stove where 3 men warmed their hands. "I'm telling you, it ain't natural," Jake Brennan was saying. "A woman teaching school, and her not even married. What kind of example is that for the youngins?" "Times are changing, Jake," Doc Hartley countered. "We need someone to teach these children their letters and numbers. Lord knows their parents don't have the time or learning." "Maybe so, but this Miss Hartwell from Boston," Jake spat tobacco juice into the spittoon with practiced accuracy. "I heard she told the mayor's wife that women should have the vote." The vote. Can you imagine? The third man, whom Caleb recognized as Silas Boone, laughed unpleasantly. Boone owned the largest spread in the valley and had a reputation for wanting to own more. "Let her spout her Eastern notions. Come spring, she'll be running back to Boston with her tail between her legs. This country's too hard for delicate city flowers." Caleb kept his attention on Murphy's movements, but something about the conversation rankled him. He'd seen plenty of people broken by the frontier, men and women alike. Survival out here had little to do with where you came from and everything to do with what you were made of inside. Speaking of which, Boone continued, his voice taking on a calculating tone. "Ward, I've been meaning to talk to you about that piece of land you're sitting on. That spring of yours would water a lot of cattle." Caleb turned slowly, meeting Boone's pale eyes. "It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale at the right price." "Not everything." The store fell quiet except for the crackle of the stove. Boone's face flushed slightly, but his smile never wavered. "Well, you think on it. Winter's long, and a man alone." He let the implication hang in the air like smoke. Murphy cleared his throat nervously. "That'll be $12.40, Caleb." Caleb paid without taking his eyes off Boone, then began loading his purchases into the canvas sacks he'd brought. The other men returned to their conversation, but the easy atmosphere had curdled like old milk. Outside, Caleb secured the supplies to Dusty's saddle, his movements automatic after years of practice. The wind had picked up, driving ice crystals against his exposed skin. He should head back, but something made him pause. Down the street, he could see the new schoolhouse, its fresh paint standing out against the weathered buildings around it. Smoke rose from its chimney, suggesting the mysterious Miss Hartwell was already at work. "None of your concern," he muttered to himself, swinging into the saddle. But as he turned Dusty toward home, a commotion erupted near the schoolhouse. A woman's voice, clear and sharp as a bell, cut through the wind. Caleb reined in his horse, watching as a small crowd gathered. The woman stood on the schoolhouse steps, and even from a distance, Caleb could see she was young, maybe 25, with auburn hair pinned severely back from her face. She wore a practical gray dress and a wool shawl, but there was nothing meek about her posture. "Mr. Boone," she was saying, her Eastern accent carrying clearly. "The children of your ranch hands have as much right to an education as anyone else's. I won't turn them away because their fathers work for wages instead of owning land." Boone stood at the bottom of the steps, his bulk imposing even from Caleb's vantage point. "Miss Hartwell, you clearly don't understand how things work here. Those children are needed for chores. Their parents can't spare them for your fancy book learning." "Then perhaps we should arrange evening classes," she suggested. "I'm willing to." "You're willing," Boone laughed, the sound carrying an edge of menace. "Little girl, you've been here all of 2 weeks. Don't presume to tell us how to run our town." The crowd murmured, some in agreement, others looking uncomfortable. Caleb found himself urging Dusty closer, drawn despite his better judgment. "I'm not telling anyone how to run anything," Miss Hartwell replied, her chin lifting. "I'm simply offering to teach anyone who wants to learn. That's what I was hired to do." "You were hired to teach the children of respectable families," Boone countered. "Not every stray that wanders in from the range." "And who determines respectability?" "Mr. Boone, you." There was a challenge in her voice that made several people gasp. Caleb had moved close enough now to see Boone's face redden. The man took a step toward the stairs, and Caleb tensed, but Miss Hartwell didn't retreat. Instead, she descended 2 steps, bringing herself closer to eye level with the big rancher. "Education is the right of every American child," she said firmly, "not just the ones whose parents meet your approval." "You need to learn your place, woman," Boone growled. "I know my place, sir. It's at the front of that classroom, teaching any child who wants to learn." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Boone turned on his heel and stalked away, calling over his shoulder, "We'll see how long your noble ideas last when winter really sets in. This ain't Boston, Miss Hartwell." The crowd began to disperse, people hurrying about their business with the furtive energy of those who'd witnessed something they'd be discussing for weeks. Miss Hartwell stood on the steps a moment longer, her hands clasped in front of her, before turning to go back inside. That's when her eyes met Caleb's. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the dusty street. Her eyes were green, he noticed, green as spring grass, and there was a defiance in them that reminded him of a Mustang he'd once tried to break. But there was something else, too, a flicker of uncertainty, quickly masked. She nodded once, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or dismissal, then disappeared into the schoolhouse. Caleb sat there a moment longer, aware he'd just witnessed something significant. Sagebrush Crossing had seen its share of people who thought they could change things, make them better. Most learned to adapt or left. But something about this woman suggested she might be different. "None of your concern," he told himself again, louder this time, and turned Dusty toward home. The ride back to his ranch took 2 hours, the wind growing stronger with each mile. By the time he reached his property line, marked by a gate made from lodgepole pines, snow was falling in earnest. The mountains to the west had disappeared behind a wall of white, and the temperature was dropping fast. His cabin sat in a grove of cottonwoods near the spring that Boone coveted. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, a lean-to for storage, a small barn for Dusty and the milk cow. But Caleb had built it with his own hands, and it was solid. Smoke still rose from the chimney, suggesting the fire he'd banked that morning was holding. After tending to Dusty and bringing in the supplies, Caleb stood in his doorway, looking out at the falling snow. In a few weeks, maybe less, the trail to town would be impassable except on snowshoes. He'd be alone with his thoughts, his books, and his ghosts, just as he'd planned. So why couldn't he stop thinking about Green Eyes and the way she'd stood up to Silas Boone? He closed the door against the wind and set about storing his supplies. Everything in its place, everything organized for the long siege of winter. Coffee in the tin on the shelf, beans in the barrel, ammunition in the locked box under his bunk. The familiar ritual soothed him, reminded him why he'd chosen this life. No complications, no entanglements, no one to lose. The fire crackled in the hearth as he heated leftover stew for his supper. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, but inside was warm and quiet. This was what he needed, what he'd earned after everything he'd been through. Yet, as he ate, his mind kept returning to town, to that moment of connection across a dusty street. He tried to tell himself it was just surprise at seeing someone stand up to Boone. The man had been throwing his weight around the valley for years, and it was satisfying to see someone refuse to bow down. But he knew it was more than that. There had been something in her stance, in the set of her shoulders, that spoke of a courage born not from ignorance of what she faced, but from full knowledge and determination to face it anyway. "Fool woman," he muttered, pushing his empty bowl away. "She has no idea what she's gotten herself into." The frontier had a way of teaching harsh lessons to those who came with high ideals and noble notions. He'd seen it happen too many times. The land didn't care about your education or your principles. It cared about strength, endurance, and the ability to adapt or die. Still, as he prepared for bed, banking the fire and checking the windows against the storm, Caleb found himself hoping she might prove him wrong. It had been a long time since anyone in Sagebrush Crossing had shown that kind of backbone. The wind rattled the shutters, and somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled, long and mournful. Caleb lay in his bunk, listening to the familiar sounds of a Wyoming winter night. This was his life. Solitary, predictable, safe from the pain that came from caring too much. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it did, he dreamed of green eyes and autumn hair, and a voice that rang clear as a bell through the storm. The weekly market day in Sagebrush Crossing drew folks from miles around, despite the early December cold. Clara Hartwell adjusted her wool shawl against the wind as she made her way between the vendors' stalls, her basket already half full with winter vegetables and preserves. She'd been in town nearly a month now, long enough to recognize most faces, though few had warmed to her beyond polite nods. The market sprawled across the main square, a mixture of permanent shops and temporary stalls where ranchers' wives sold eggs, butter, and handicrafts. The smell of fresh bread from Mrs. Kowalski's booth competed with the sharp scent of pickled cabbage and the earthier aroma of leather goods. Clara paused at a display of knitted mittens, admiring the intricate patterns. The woman behind the table, Mary Two Rivers, was one of the few who'd shown her genuine kindness. "Morning. Miss Hartwell, how are the children coming along with their lessons?" "Very well, Mrs. Two Rivers. Young Joseph has a real gift for numbers." The woman's weathered face creased in a proud smile. "He gets that from his grandfather. That man could calculate the price of a herd faster than anyone in the territory." Their pleasant conversation was interrupted by a familiar voice that made Clara's spine stiffen. Well, if it isn't our crusading schoolmarm, Silas Boone stood nearby, flanked by two of his ranch hands. His expensive coat and polished boots marked him as a man of means, but there was something predatory in his pale eyes that no amount of finery could disguise. Mr. Boone, Clara acknowledged coolly, turning back to examine the mittens. But Boone wasn't finished. He stepped closer, his bulk casting a shadow over the display table. I heard you've been filling the children's heads with stories about women voting and owning property. That kind of nonsense might fly in Boston, but out here, we know the natural order of things. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice level. I teach history, Mr. Boone, including the fact that Wyoming Territory was the first to grant women the vote in 1869. That's not nonsense, it's fact. Facts can be dangerous in the wrong hands. Boone replied, his voice dropping to a more menacing register. Especially when they give people ideas above their station. Mary, Two Rivers, had gone very still, her eyes downcast. Others nearby were pretending not to notice the confrontation, but Clara could feel their attention like electricity in the air. Education is never dangerous, Mr. Boone, Clara said, meeting his gaze steadily. Ignorance is... Boone's face darkened. You've got a sharp tongue, Miss Hartwell. Sharp tongues have a way of getting cut out here. Is that a threat, Mr. Boone? It's advice, free of charge. He touched the brim of his hat mockingly. You might want to consider taking it. He moved away, his men following like obedient dogs. Clara realized her hands were trembling slightly and clasped them together to still them. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing he'd rattled her. You should be careful, Mary Two Rivers said quietly. Mr. Boone is not a man to cross lightly. Neither am I a woman to be bullied, Mrs. Two Rivers, Clara replied, though her voice was less steady than she'd have liked. She purchased the mittens and moved on, but the encounter had soured the morning. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes upon her, heard whispers in her wake. Some seemed sympathetic, others disapproving, but none offered open support. Clara was examining dried apples at another stall when a commotion erupted near the livestock pens. Shouts and the thunder of hooves sent people scattering. A young horse, barely more than a colt, had broken free and was careening through the market, eyes rolling white with fear. Without thinking, Clara dropped her basket and moved toward the panicked animal. Her father had bred horses back in Massachusetts, and she'd grown up around them. She knew the worst thing was to add to the chaos. Easy now, she called in a low, soothing voice, positioning herself where the horse could see her clearly. Easy there, young fellow. No one's going to hurt you. The colt slowed, sides heaving, foam flecking his mouth. Clara continued talking, nonsense mostly, but in that calm, rhythmic tone horses found comforting. Step by step, she approached, her hand extended. That's it. Good boy. You're just scared. Aren't you? All these strangers and strange smells. She was almost close enough to catch the dangling lead rope when someone moved too quickly nearby. The colt shied violently, rearing up. Clara saw the hooves flashing down toward her and tried to dodge, but her skirts tangled around her legs. Strong hands grabbed her from behind, lifting and spinning her out of harm's way. She found herself pressed against a hard chest, the scent of leather and wood smoke filling her nostrils. The colt's hooves struck the ground where she'd been standing a heartbeat before. You all right? She recognized the voice before she looked up into Caleb Ward's weather-beaten face. This close, she could see lines carved by sun and wind, and eyes the gray of winter storms. Yes, thank you. He released her immediately, stepping back to a proper distance. But Clara had felt the strength in his arms, the steady beat of his heart against her back. It left her oddly unsettled. Caleb had already turned his attention to the colt, moving with the same quiet confidence she'd tried to project. Within moments, he had the lead rope in hand, the young horse standing quietly beside him. Jim Morrison, he called. "This your colt?" A shamefaced young man hurried over. "Yes, sir, Mr. Ward. He spooked when Mrs. Henderson's dog started barking." "He needs more work before you bring him to town," Caleb said, handing over the rope. "Could have hurt someone." "Yes, sir, I'm mighty sorry." As the boy led the horse away, Caleb turned back to Clara. "That was brave. Foolish, but brave." "I know horses," she said, bristling slightly at being called foolish. Knowing horses and knowing range horses are two different things. These aren't your Eastern carriage ponies. "I'm aware of that, Mr. Ward, but I couldn't simply stand by and watch." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "No, I don't suppose you could." They stood there awkwardly for a moment before Clara remembered her manners. "Thank you again for your assistance. You might want to watch those skirts next time," he said. "They'll get you killed out here faster than ignorance." Before she could form a suitably tart reply, he touched his hat and walked away. Clara stood there, fuming. The nerve of the man, as if she'd chosen to wear these cumbersome garments, as if any woman had a choice in such matters. She retrieved her scattered purchases, aware of the new round of whispers her rescue had generated. Great. Now she was not only the troublesome Eastern schoolteacher, but also the foolish woman who needed saving from her own skirts. The rest of the market day passed without incident, though Clara couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She made her purchases efficiently and returned to her small cottage behind the schoolhouse, grateful for the privacy. The cottage was modest but comfortable, a main room that served as kitchen and living area, and a small bedroom. The school board had provided basic furnishings, and Clara had added her own touches books on every surface, her mother's quilt on the bed, and botanical sketches she'd made during her journey west. As she unpacked her market purchases, her mind kept returning to the morning's encounters. Boone's threats worried her less than the town's apparent indifference. She'd known teaching in the frontier would be challenging, but she'd expected... What gratitude enthusiasm! "Pride goeth before a fall. Clara Louise," she murmured, echoing her late grandmother's favorite warning. She spent the afternoon preparing lessons for the coming week, losing herself in the familiar comfort of books and plans. But as evening approached, a new worry intruded. The schoolhouse roof had developed a leak during the last storm, and with snow threatening again, it needed repair before Monday's classes. She'd asked the school board about it, but Jake Brennan had hemmed and hawed about funds and priorities. Meanwhile, her students had to dodge drips and struggle to see the blackboard in the dim light from water-stained windows. A knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Clara opened it to find young Timothy Sullivan, one of her students, hat in hand and cheeks red from the cold. "Evening, Miss Hartwell. Ma sent me to ask if you'd like to join us for Sunday dinner tomorrow. She says it ain't right, you eating alone on the Lord's Day." Clara felt a warm rush of gratitude. The Sullivans were a struggling family with 6 children, but their kindness seemed boundless. "That's very generous. Timothy, please tell your mother I'd be delighted." The boy grinned. "She'll be pleased. She's making her special pot roast." He paused, then added shyly, "I've been practicing my reading. Miss got through a whole page of Robinson Crusoe last night." "That's wonderful. Timothy, I'm so proud of you." After the boy left, Clara felt her spirits lift. Perhaps she was making a difference, even if it was one student at a time. She prepared a simple supper and was settling in with a book when another knock came. This time, she opened the door to find Caleb Ward on her doorstep, tools in hand. "Mr. Ward, is something wrong? Heard you had a leak in the schoolhouse roof," he said without preamble. "Thought I'd take a look before the next storm hits." Clara blinked in surprise. "That's very kind, but it's nearly dark." "Won't take long. Just need to see what supplies to bring tomorrow." Well, thank you. Let me get my shawl." She led him to the schoolhouse, unlocking the door with the heavy key the school board had given her. Inside. The late afternoon light slanted through windows, illuminating rows of desks and the water stains on the ceiling. Caleb studied the damage with a practiced eye. Shingles are shot, probably been leaking for years. I'll need cedar shakes, tar paper, and a day's work to fix it proper. I'm afraid the school board hasn't approved the funds. Didn't ask about funds. He turned to face her, and Clara was struck again by how his presence seemed to fill the space. Children need a dry place to learn. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. You don't have children in the school. You don't even come to town meetings. Why do you care? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving over the simple classroom. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it before. My sister wanted to be a teacher back in Ohio before. He trailed off, then continued more briskly. Education matters, even out here, maybe especially out here. Clara sensed a story there. Pain carefully locked away. She knew better than to pry. I can help, she offered. I'm quite handy with tools. That almost smile flickered again. In those skirts, I have work clothes, Mr. Ward, practical ones. All right then, tomorrow after church, weather should hold until afternoon. He moved toward the door, then paused. You stood up to Boone again today. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. He seems to think intimidation is a valid argument. It usually is, out here. Caleb's expression was unreadable in the dim light. You might want to be more careful. Boone doesn't like being challenged, especially by women. And you, Mr. Ward, do you also think women should know their place? He studied her for a moment. I think people should know what battles are worth fighting, and what battles will get them hurt. All battles worth fighting carry that risk. Spoken like someone who's never been hurt bad enough. There was something in his voice that made Clara shiver, a weight of experience she couldn't fathom. Before she could respond, he'd touched his hat and gone, leaving her alone in the growing darkness of the schoolhouse. She locked up carefully and returned to her cottage, but concentration on her book proved impossible. Her thoughts kept circling back to Caleb Ward, his unexpected kindness, the pain glimpsed beneath his stoic exterior, the way her pulse had quickened when he'd held her. Absolutely not, she told herself firmly. She'd come west to teach, to make a difference, not to develop romantic notions about taciturn cowboys with storm-gray eyes. But as she prepared for bed, Clara couldn't deny a flutter of anticipation at the thought of tomorrow. Working alongside Caleb Ward to fix the roof might be purely practical, but it was also an opportunity to understand the man who'd twice now appeared when she needed help. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling her windows and whistling through the gaps. Winter was closing in, and with it, all the challenges Boone and others had warned her about. But Clara Hartwell had faced worse than Wyoming winters and small-minded men. She'd come west to teach, and teach she would, even if it meant standing up to bullies, wearing practical clothes that shocked the locals, and accepting help from mysterious cowboys who seemed to see too much with those watchful gray eyes. The frontier might test her, but it wouldn't break her. And perhaps, just perhaps, she might find more here than she'd ever dreamed of back in Boston's comfortable parlors. The blizzard struck without warning on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara had dismissed the children early when the sky turned an ominous yellow-gray, but she'd lingered at the schoolhouse, organizing supplies and updating her lesson plans. By the time she realized the severity of the storm, the world outside had transformed into a howling white void. She struggled to close the door against the wind, snow already piling against the threshold. The temperature had plummeted, and her thin shawl offered little protection. The cottage was only 50 yards behind the schoolhouse, but in this weather, it might as well have been 50 miles. Clara knew the stories of people lost between barn and house, frozen to death, mere feet from safety. She tried to gauge the direction, but the snow was so thick she couldn't see the building she'd just left. A gust of wind knocked her sideways, and she stumbled, her hands plunging into a snowdrift. The cold burned like fire, and panic clawed at her throat. She couldn't stay here, but moving blindly could lead her away from the shelter into the open prairie. Then, through the roar of the storm, she heard it, the clang of a bell, the school bell, ringing steadily, giving her direction. She struggled toward the sound, each step a battle against the wind. Her skirts, heavy with snow, dragged at her legs. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, a figure loomed out of the white. Strong hands grasped her shoulders, and she found herself looking up into Caleb Ward's face, ice crystals clinging to his beard. "This way," he shouted over the wind, keeping one hand on her arm as he led her not toward her cottage, but in a different direction. She wanted to protest, but speaking was impossible in the teeth of the gale. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, they reached the dark bulk of a building. Caleb wrestled with a door, and then they were inside, the sudden absence of wind almost shocking. Clara's eyes adjusted to find herself in a barn, his barn. She realized. Caleb was already moving, lighting a lantern that cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Your cottage is on the wrong side of the wind," he explained, shaking snow from his coat. "We'd never have made it. The schoolhouse is old. Walls are too thin. This is better." Clara's teeth were chattering too hard to argue. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she began to shake, whether from cold or delayed fear. She wasn't sure. "Here." Caleb draped a horse blanket around her shoulders, then led her to a corner where hay bales formed a makeshift shelter. "Sit. I'll get a fire going." There was a small stove in the corner, the kind used to warm water for the animals. Soon, warmth began to seep into the space. Clara pulled the blanket tighter, watching as Caleb moved with quiet efficiency, checking on his horse and milk cow, making sure the barn doors were secure. "How did you know?" she finally managed to ask. "How did you know I was out there?" He paused in his work. "Saw the children leaving early. Figured you might stay late. Like you always do. When the storm hit hard, I came to check." He gestured toward the door. "Bell was my idea. Sound carries better than sight in a blizzard." "You saved my life." The words came out smaller than she'd intended. "You'd have figured something out." But his eyes were kind as he said it. He settled onto a hay bale across from her, and for a while, they sat in silence, listening to the storm rage outside. The barn was surprisingly comfortable, filled with the warm scent of hay and animals, the horse occasionally stamping in its stall. "I'm sorry," Clara said suddenly. Caleb looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For being foolish. You warned me about the weather, about not understanding how things work here. I should have left with the children. Maybe." He leaned back against the wall. "But staying late to prepare lessons for your students isn't foolish. Just means you care more about their learning than your own comfort." It was possibly the longest speech she'd heard from him. Clara studied his face in the lantern light, seeing new lines of fatigue, but also something else, a loneliness that matched her own. "Tell me about your sister," she said softly, "the one who wanted to be a teacher." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Sarah, she was 2 years younger than me. Smart as a whip, always reading, always asking questions. Used to drive our father crazy." "What happened to her?" "Cholera. Summer of '66. She was 17. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact, but Clara could hear the old grief beneath. She'd just gotten accepted to teacher's college. Had it all planned out. She'd teach for a few years, save money, then open her own school." "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Long time ago." But Clara understood now why he'd fixed her roof, why he'd come looking for her in the storm. In some way, helping her was honoring his sister's memory. The wind howled louder, and the barn creaked ominously. Caleb rose to check the doors again, reinforcing the bar with a length of timber. When he returned, he brought a bundle from a storage box. "Emergency supplies," he explained, producing hardtack, dried beef, and a canteen of water. "Might be here a while." They shared the simple meal in companionable silence. Clara found herself oddly content. Despite the circumstances, there was something peaceful about being cut off from the world, protected in this warm pocket while nature raged outside. "What about you?" Caleb asked suddenly. "What made a Boston lady come all the way out here to teach?" Clara considered her answer. "I suppose I wanted to matter. In Boston, there were dozens of teachers, hundreds of educated women all competing for the same positions. Here, I thought I could make a real difference." "And have you—" "I don't know." She pulled the blanket tighter. "Sometimes I think yes when Timothy Sullivan reads a whole page, or when little Amy Chen solves a mathematics problem. But then men like Silas Boone remind me that some people don't want things to change. Change comes slow out here," Caleb said. "Land doesn't change. Weather doesn't change. So people figure they shouldn't either. But they must. The world is moving forward. Women have the vote here, even if they don't elsewhere. The railroad brings new ideas, new people. Education is the key to progress." Her passion had brought color to her cheeks, and Caleb found himself smiling, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. "What?" Clara demanded. "Nothing, just—" "You remind me of Sarah when you talk like that. She used to get that same fire in her eyes when she talked about teaching." The comparison sobered Clara. "I hope I can live up to her dreams." "You already are." The simple statement hung between them, weighted with meaning. Clara felt her heart skip, and suddenly the barn felt smaller, more intimate. She was acutely aware of every detail, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the strength in his hands as he broke a piece of hardtack, the way the lantern light caught the silver threads in his dark hair. "Mr. Ward." "Caleb," he corrected. "Seems foolish to be formal when we're sharing a barn in a blizzard." Caleb. His name felt strange on her tongue, too personal. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Why do you live alone, a man like you? Surely you could have a family, a proper home." His expression shuddered. "Had a proper home once, didn't take." Clara waited, sensing more beneath the terse words. "Her name was Margaret," he said finally. "We were engaged. Back in Kansas. She was the daughter of a merchant, used to nice things. I'd just started my ranch, told her it would be hard at first, but we'd build something good together." He paused, and Clara held her breath, afraid to break the spell of his telling. First winter was brutal. She tried, I'll give her that. But the isolation, the work, the constant struggle, it wore her down. Come spring, she told me she couldn't do it anymore. Went back east, married a banker. That must have been devastating. It was educational. His smile held no humor. Learned that some people aren't made for this life. Learned it's better to know that early before you build too much together. Clara understood now his warnings about the harsh realities of frontier life. He'd been trying to prepare her for disappointment, perhaps even trying to drive her away before she could disappoint him like Margaret had. "I'm not her," she said quietly. His eyes met hers. "No, you're not." The wind had begun to die down, the fury of the storm passing as quickly as it had come. Caleb rose to peer out through a crack in the door. "It's easing. Another hour, maybe 2, and we can dig out." Clara was surprised to feel disappointment. Despite the circumstances, she'd felt more alive in these few hours than in all her weeks in Sagebrush Crossing. They talked more as they waited. About books he was surprisingly well read. About the challenges of ranching. About her students and their progress. Clara found herself laughing at his dry observations about town politics, and even coaxed a few chuckles from him with her impressions of misses. Henderson's weekly moral improvement lectures. When they finally emerged from the barn, the world had been transformed. Snow lay thick and pristine, sculpted into fantastic shapes by the wind. The sky had cleared, revealing a tapestry of stars so brilliant Clara gasped. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It is." But Caleb wasn't looking at the sky. He walked her to her cottage, breaking trail through the knee-deep snow. At her door, they stood awkwardly, both aware that something had shifted between them in the barn's warm confines. "Thank you," Clara said, "for everything." "You'll want to keep plenty of wood by the door," he said, reverting to practical matters. "And rope between your cottage and the schoolhouse. Next storm might last longer." "I will." He turned to go, then paused. "Clara." Her given name sounded rusty, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. "What you're doing here, teaching those children, it matters. Don't let anyone tell you different." Before she could respond, he'd touched his hat and stridden away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. Inside her cottage, Clara built up the fire and changed into dry clothes, but sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Caleb's face in the lantern light, felt the warmth of the barn, heard his voice saying her name. She'd come west seeking purpose, independence, a chance to make a difference. She hadn't expected to find herself drawn to a lonely rancher with gentle hands and eyes that held too much pain. "You're here to teach," she reminded herself firmly. But her heart whispered that perhaps there were different kinds of lessons to be learned, different ways to matter in someone's life. Outside, snow began to fall again, softly this time, like a benediction on the sleeping town, and in a ranch house 2 miles away. Caleb Ward sat by his own fire, thinking about green eyes and passionate speeches about progress, about the way lamplight caught in auburn hair, and about how empty his barn felt now that she was gone. The frontier had thrown them together in a crisis, breaking down the walls of formality and caution. What remained to be seen was whether they could find their way to each other without a blizzard to force their hands. But that's a worry for tomorrow, Clara thought, finally drifting off to sleep. For tonight, she was warm and safe, with the memory of unexpected shelter and even more unexpected connection to hold against whatever storms might come. The gossip started as a whisper and grew to a roar within days. Mrs. Henderson, the mayor's wife and self-appointed guardian of public morality, had seen Caleb Ward leaving Clara's cottage at what she deemed an unseemly hour after the blizzard. Never mind that he'd saved Clara's life and waited for safe conditions to escort her home. In the minds of Sagebrush Crossing's more conservative citizens, a young unmarried woman spending hours alone with a bachelor spelled scandal. Clara first noticed the change on Sunday morning at church. Conversations ceased when she approached, and several women pulled their children closer as she passed. She took her usual pew near the back, but the family that typically shared it moved to another row. During Reverend Morrison's sermon on the Good Samaritan, Clara couldn't help but note the irony. Here was a parable about helping others regardless of social boundaries, yet she was being shunned for accepting precisely such help. After the service, she was preparing to leave when Mrs. Henderson intercepted her, flanked by Mrs. Brennan and Mrs. Cooper like generals positioning for battle. "Miss Hartwell," Mrs. Henderson began, her tone suggesting she'd bitten into something sour. "We need to discuss your situation." "My situation?" Clara kept her voice level, though her stomach tightened. "Your conduct with Mr. Ward has become a matter of public concern. As prominent members of the school board's advisory committee, we feel it's our duty to address it." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Ward saved my life during the blizzard. Would you have preferred he left me to freeze?" Mrs. Cooper, a nervous woman who rarely spoke without her friend's approval, piped up. "Of course not, dear, but surely you must see how it looks. Hours alone with a man. Unchaperoned. In a barn during a life-threatening storm. Clara's patience was wearing thin. Nevertheless, Mrs. Henderson continued, we must consider your influence on the impressionable young minds in your charge. What message does this send to our daughters? That they should accept help when they need it, that they should be grateful when someone risks their own safety to protect them. Mrs. Brennan, Jake's wife, shook her head disapprovingly. You're being deliberately obtuse, Miss Hartwell. You know very well what we mean. There are standards to maintain. Yes, there are, Clara agreed. Standards of kindness, courage, and Christian charity. Mr. Ward exemplified all three. I fail to see how that corrupts anyone. The women exchanged glances, and Mrs. Henderson's mouth pursed even tighter. Perhaps you'd understand better if you'd been raised in a proper Western community instead of among those liberal Eastern notions. Out here, a woman's reputation is everything. And a woman's life is nothing. Clara's voice had grown dangerously quiet. Don't be dramatic. Mrs. Henderson sniffed. The point is, you must be more careful. Distance yourself from Mr. Ward. Focus on your teaching and nothing else. Otherwise, Clara prompted. Otherwise, we may need to reconsider your suitability for the position. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara looked at each woman in turn, seeing fear beneath their righteousness, fear of change, of independence, of anything that challenged their carefully ordered world. I understand perfectly, Clara said finally. Good day, ladies. She left with her head high, but inside, her emotions churned. The injustice of it burned, but worse was the practical reality. She needed this job, believed in her mission here. Could she afford to antagonize these influential women? Outside, she nearly collided with someone. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up to find Caleb himself, dressed in his church clothes, a sight rare enough to have caused its own stir. You all right? His gray eyes were concerned. Clara became acutely aware of the many eyes watching them from the church steps. I'm fine, but we shouldn't be seen talking. Understanding dawned in his expression, followed by a flash of anger. They're giving you trouble because of the storm. It doesn't matter. I can handle it. Clara, please. She stepped back, hating herself for the hurt that flickered across his face. I can't lose this position. The children need me. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If that's what you want. She watched him walk to his horse, mount up, and ride away without looking back. The loss felt like a physical ache, but she pushed it down. She had a job to do, children to teach. Personal feelings were a luxury she couldn't afford. But Silas Boone had been watching the entire exchange with interest. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Over the following weeks, Clara threw herself into her work with renewed determination. She arrived early, left late, and maintained strict propriety in all her dealing. When she encountered Caleb in town, she offered only formal nods, though each distant acknowledgement felt like betrayal. The children sensed something was wrong. Young Amy Chen asked why Mr. Ward didn't come to fix things anymore. Timothy Sullivan mentioned his PA had seen Mr. Ward riding past the schoolhouse without stopping, looking mighty grim. Clara deflected their questions and focused on lessons, but her heart wasn't in it. The classroom felt colder without the possibility of seeing Caleb's tall frame in the doorway, tools in hand and that almost smile playing at his lips. Then came the day when Silas Boone decided to escalate matters. Clara was teaching arithmetic when the door burst open. Boone entered without invitation, followed by two of his ranch hands and, surprisingly, Mrs. Henderson. Can I help you? Clara asked, positioning herself between the intruders and her students. Just exercising my rights as a taxpayer, Boone said smoothly, checking on how our money's being spent. The school board is responsible for oversight. Mr. Boone, you have no authority here. Don't I? He produced a paper from his coat. Petition. Signed by concerned citizens, requesting an immediate review of your teaching methods and moral standing. Clara's hands clenched, but she kept her voice steady. Children, please continue with your problems. I'll be just a moment. She stepped into the aisle, forcing Boone to deal with her away from the students. You have no right to disrupt my class. I have every right to protect this community's children from inappropriate influences. His voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. A teacher who consorts with men, who fills young minds with radical ideas. That's enough. Clara's voice cut like a blade. Children, I'm dismissing class early today. Please gather your things quietly. As the students filed out, shooting confused and worried glances back, Clara heard young Joseph Two Rivers whisper to Amy Chin, My ma says Miss Hartwell's the best teacher we ever had. Once they were alone, Clara faced her antagonists. Say what you came to say. Boone's smile was predatory. It's simple. Resign. Leave town. Today. And if I refuse? Then I'll call a town meeting. Present evidence of your moral failings. How you've been secretly meeting with Caleb Ward. One incident during a blizzard. Several incidents. Boone corrected. He's been seen at your cottage. You've been seen together at market. That embrace outside the church. You're twisting innocent encounters into something sordid. Would the good people of Sagebrush Crossing see it that way, especially when I add in your radical teachings, your insistence on educating the lower classes, your defiance of natural social order. Mrs. Henderson spoke up. It's for the best. Dear, a young woman like you could easily find another position back east where your modern ideas would be more welcome. Clara looked between them, understanding dawning. This isn't about my supposed impropriety at all. It's about control. Mr. Boone wants to control who gets educated, and you, Mrs. Henderson, want to control how women behave. Think what you like, Boone said, but decide quickly. My patience has limits. They left her standing in the empty classroom, fury and despair warring in her chest. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built here, threatened by small minds and smaller hearts. She sank into her chair, head in her hands. Was this how it ended, driven out by gossip and prejudice, her students abandoned to ignorance? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mary Two Rivers peered in. Miss Hartwell, I sent Joseph home, but I wanted to. Are you all right? Clara managed a weak smile. I've been better. Mrs. Two Rivers. The woman entered, her weathered face sympathetic. I heard what that snake Boone said. Don't you pay him no mind. Folks with sense know you're a good woman. Folks with sense don't seem to have much voice in this town. Mary was quiet for a moment. Maybe they just need someone to show them how to use it. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. That evening, Clara walked the empty main street, trying to decide her next move. The sensible thing would be to leave, find another position where her efforts would be appreciated. But the thought of abandoning her students made her chest tight with grief. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the rider until he dismounted beside her. Caleb Ward stood there, hat in hand, concern etched on his features. Heard about Boone's visit, he said without preamble. News travels fast. Are you all right? The gentleness in his voice nearly undid her. No, I'm not all right. I'm furious and frustrated and tired of fighting alone. Then don't. Don't what? Fight alone. He stepped closer. Propriety be damned. Clara, I've stayed away because you asked me to, but I won't stand by while Boone and his cronies railroad you out of town. You can't get involved. It will only make things worse. For who I've got no reputation to lose. I'm already the hermit rancher who keeps to himself. Caleb. No, listen to me. His hands came up to grip her shoulders gently. What you're doing matters. Those children need you. This town needs you, even if they're too foolish to see it, and He stopped, jaw working. You what? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. I need you too. These past weeks, staying away. It's been like trying not to breathe. I know I've got no right. I know you deserve better than a worn-out rancher with more past than future. But Clara silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. Don't you dare tell me what I deserve. I'll decide that for myself. For a moment, they stood frozen, the evening air crackling between them. Then Caleb's hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. You sure about this? If we stand together, there's no going back. The talk will get worse before it gets better. Let them talk, Clara said fiercely. I'm tired of letting fear dictate my life. Aren't you? Instead of answering, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he was afraid she might vanish. Then Clara's arms came up around his neck, and the kiss deepened, weeks of denial and longing pouring into the connection. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Clara became aware of their very public location. Several townspeople had stopped to stare, including a horrified Mrs. Cooper. Well, Clara said, a slightly hysterical laugh bubbling up. I suppose that settles the question of propriety. Caleb's rare, full smile transformed his face. I suppose it does. They'll run me out of town for certain now. They'll try. His expression grew serious. But they'll have to go through me first, and I'm not as easy to move as they might think. Clara felt something ease in her chest. For the first time since coming to Sagebrush Crossing, she wasn't facing the storm alone. Whatever came next, she had an ally, a partner, perhaps more than that, if the warmth in Caleb's eyes was any indication. So, she said, attempting lightness despite her racing heart. What do we do now? Now, Caleb offered his arm. Now I walk you home like a proper gentleman. Tomorrow, we start fighting back. As they walked through the town square, heads high despite the whispers following in their wake, Clara felt a surge of something that might have been hope. The battle for her position, for her student's future, wasn't over. But she wasn't fighting alone anymore. And sometimes, in the face of prejudice and small-mindedness, that made all the difference. The fire crackled in Clara's small hearth as she poured coffee for Caleb. Their third evening together since their public declaration in the town square. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the world in pristine white. But inside, the atmosphere was warm with more than just the fire's heat. The school board meets tomorrow, Clara said, settling beside him on the small settee. Boone's been lobbying hard. Mrs. Henderson says I've lost all moral authority. Caleb's jaw tightened. Based on what that we've been seen talking that I walked you home? That kiss didn't help matters, Clara said, though a smile played at her lips. I'm not sorry for it. Neither am I. She set down her cup, suddenly restless. But I am sorry for what it might cost. Your reputation. Stop! Caleb caught her hand. We've been through this. I made my choice. Clara studied their intertwined fingers, marveling at how right it felt. These past days had been a revelation. Behind Caleb's stoic exterior was a man of surprising depth. Well-read, thoughtful, with a dry humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh when she least expected it. Tell me about the war, she said quietly. It was the one topic he'd avoided, though she'd seen the shadows cross his face when certain subjects arose. His hand tensed in hers. Why? Because I want to understand, all of you, not just the parts you think are acceptable. For a long moment, only the fire spoke. Then, I was 19 when I enlisted, full of fire and certainty. Ohio Regiment, thought we'd whip the rebels and be home by Christmas. His voice had gone distant, seeing things she couldn't imagine. 4 years later, I came home a different man. Seen too much, done too much, things that don't wash off, no matter how far west you run. Is that why you came here to run? To forget, to find some peace. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. Didn't expect to find you instead. Clara's breath caught at the raw honesty in his eyes. Caleb, I need to tell you something. About Margaret, about why she really left. Clara waited, sensing the importance of this moment. I told you she couldn't handle the frontier life, and that was true. But there was more. He released her hand to stand, pacing to the window. I'd have nightmares, bad ones. Wake up shouting, fighting enemies who weren't there. One night, I woke with my hands around her throat, thinking she was... He couldn't finish, but Clara understood. She rose and went to him, laying a gentle hand on his back. She was terrified, packed up the next day. Can't say I blamed her. That wasn't your fault, Clara said firmly. The war did that, not you. Doesn't matter whose fault it was. Results the same. He turned to face her. You need to know what you're getting into. I'm better now. Haven't had an episode in years, but... Clara silenced him by taking his face in her hands. Listen to me. Caleb Ward. You are not broken. You are not dangerous. You are a good man who survived terrible things and came out the other side with your heart intact, even if it is a bit battered. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen how gentle you are with your animals, how you fixed my roof without being asked, how you risked your life to save mine in that blizzard. Those aren't the actions of a violent man. Clara? His voice was rough with emotion. I'm not Margaret, she said firmly. I'm not afraid of your shadows. We all have them. The question is whether we face them alone or together. He pulled her against him then, holding her as if she were precious and fragile and necessary all at once. Clara felt him shudder, releasing some long-held tension, and she held him tighter. I love you, he whispered into her hair. God help me, I fought it, but I love you. Clara pulled back to meet his eyes. I love you too, scandal and gossip and all. The kiss that followed was different from their first, deeper, surer, with the weight of understanding behind it. When they parted, both were breathless. Stay, Clara whispered. Caleb's hands tightened on her waist. Clara, I want to, more than you know. But not like this, not with the whole town watching, waiting for us to prove them right. She knew he was right, though every fiber of her being protested. Always the gentleman, even when I don't want you to be. When this is over, he promised. When you're secure in your position and we can do things proper. He kissed her again, a promise sealed. Wait for me. I've been waiting for you my whole life, she said. What's a little longer? Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next morning, Clara dressed carefully for the school board meeting, her most severe dress, her hair pinned tightly back, the picture of propriety, though she knew it wouldn't matter to those determined to see scandal. Caleb arrived to escort her, dressed in his best clothes, looking uncomfortable but determined. You don't have to come, she said, though his presence steadied her nerves. Yes, I do. He offered his arm. Partners, remember. The meeting was held in the church, the only building large enough to hold the crowd that had gathered. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness her judgment. Jake Brennan, as board president, called the meeting to order. Beside him sat Doc Hartley, Reverend Morrison, Mayor Henderson, and Tom Murphy from the general store. We're here to discuss the continued employment of Miss Clara Hartwell. Brennan began. There have been, concerns raised about her conduct and teaching methods. If I may. Silas Boone stood from the front row. I have a list of grievances to present. For the next 20 minutes, Boone laid out his case with the skill of a practiced politician. Clara's inappropriate relationship with Caleb Ward, her insistence on teaching children from all social classes, her radical ideas about women's roles, her Eastern affectations that set a poor example. In conclusion, Boone said. Miss Hartwell has proven herself unfit to shape young minds. I move for her immediate dismissal. Second, Mrs. Henderson called out. Any response, Miss Hartwell? Brennan asked. Clara stood, aware of every eye upon her. She'd prepared a speech, but looking at the faces before her, some hostile, some sympathetic, some merely curious, she threw it aside. I came here to teach, she began simply. To offer education to any child who wanted to learn. I've done nothing immoral, nothing improper. Yes, I've formed a friendship with Mr. Ward, a friendship that has recently deepened into something more. But since when is love a crime? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. As for my teaching methods, she continued, I believe every child deserves education, regardless of their parents' station. If that makes me radical, so be it. This territory granted women the vote because it recognized our worth as equal citizens. Should we not also recognize the worth of every child? Pretty words, Boone interjected. But the fact remains. The fact remains, a new voice interrupted, that you're a hypocrite and a liar, Silas Boone. Everyone turned to see Mary Two Rivers standing, her usually quiet demeanor replaced by steel. Mrs. Two Rivers, Brennan said, this is not— You want to talk about moral failings, Mary continued. Let's talk about how Mr. Boone has been trying to force families off their land by damming water sources. Let's talk about how he threatened Tom Sullivan's job if he didn't sign that petition against Miss Hartwell. That's slander, Boone sputtered. Is it? Old Pete Hawkins stood. Because he tried the same with me. Said he'd call in my loan if I didn't speak against the teacher. More voices rose. People Boone had pressured, threatened, or manipulated. Clara watched in amazement as the tide turned. Citizen after citizen standing to defend her and expose Boone's tactics. Enough, Boone roared. This isn't about me. No, it's about control, Caleb said, speaking for the first time. You want to control the water, the land, and the minds of the next generation. You see Miss Hartwell as a threat because she teaches children to think for themselves. And what's your interest? Ward's sweet on the teacher. Are you— Boone's sneer was ugly. Planning to marry her and live happily ever after? You think she'll stick around when winter really hits, when the isolation drives her mad like it did your last woman? The room went deadly quiet. Clara felt Caleb tense beside her, saw his fists clench. For a moment, violence crackled in the air. Then Caleb spoke, his voice controlled but carrying to every corner. Yes, I plan to marry her, if she'll have me. And yes, I believe she'll stay, because unlike you, I've learned to see people for who they really are, not who I want them to be. He turned to address the room at large. Miss Hartwell came here to teach. In the month she's been here, she's done more for this community's children than anyone before her. My nephew in Denver can barely read. The Sullivan boy is working through Robinson Crusoe. Amy Chen is doing mathematics problems her parents can't solve. That's what matters. Here, here, several voices called out. Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. She'd expected to fight alone, or at most with Caleb beside her. She hadn't expected the community itself to rise in her defense. Reverend Morrison cleared his throat. Perhaps we should vote, all in favor of retaining Miss Hartwell. Doc Hartley's hand shot up immediately, followed by Tom Murphy's. After a long moment, Reverend Morrison raised his own. Jake Brennan hesitated, glancing at his wife, then slowly raised his hand as well. Only Mayor Henderson held out, sweating under the crowd's hostile gaze. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he too raised his hand. Motion carried. Brennan said quickly, Miss Hartwell retains her position. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers' parents thanking her, students hugging her, townspeople offering congratulations. Through it all, she was aware of Caleb nearby, solid and sure, fending off the more exuberant celebrants with quiet humor. Boone pushed through the crowd, his face mottled with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed at Clara. "You think you've won? I own half this valley. I can make life very difficult for anyone who crosses me." "Then I guess it's good I don't cross easy," Caleb said mildly, positioning himself between Boone and Clara. "And neither does she. We'll see about that." Boone stalked out, his remaining supporters trailing behind. As the crowd began to disperse, Clara sagged against Caleb, emotional exhaustion hitting her all at once. "Take me home," she whispered. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Outside her cottage, the stars blazed in the clear winter sky. Clara and Caleb stood close together, reluctant to end this momentous day. "You asked her to marry you," Clara said softly, "in front of everyone." Seemed like the time for grand gestures. His thumb traced circles on her hand. "Though I'd planned something more romantic for the actual proposal." Clara's heart skipped. "The actual proposal?" Caleb dropped to one knee in the snow, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. "Clara Hartwell, you came into my life like a storm, shaking up everything I thought I knew. You've shown me that hiding from life isn't living. You've brought light to my darkness and hope where I had none. Will you marry me?" Clara sank to her knees in front of him, not caring about the snow soaking through her dress. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. It was plain, but perfect, catching the starlight. "It was my mother's," he said. "Been carrying it around for 2 weeks, trying to find the right moment." "This moment is perfect," Clara assured him, and kissed him there in the snow, under the vast Wyoming sky. When they finally stood, brushing snow from their clothes and laughing like children, Clara felt something settle into place. This was home now, not the place, but the person. Whatever challenges came next, they would face them together. "Spring wedding," Caleb suggested. "Give the gossip something happy to talk about for a change." "Spring wedding," Clara agreed. "Though I warn you, I intend to keep teaching. Scandal of a married woman working and all." "I wouldn't have you any other way." He kissed her once more, then stepped back. "I should go. Early start tomorrow?" "Caleb," she called as he turned to leave. "Thank you for standing up for me, for believing in me." "Always," he said simply. "That's what love does." As Clara watched him disappear into the darkness, she touched the ring on her finger and smiled. She'd come west seeking purpose and found so much more. Community, challenge, and a love strong enough to weather any storm. Tomorrow, she would return to her classroom, continuing the work she'd fought so hard to preserve. But tonight, she was simply a woman in love, standing under an infinite sky, grateful for the courage to stay and fight for what mattered. The frontier had tested her and found her worthy, and in return, it had given her everything she never knew she needed. The acrid smell of smoke pulled Clara from her sleep. For a moment, she lay disoriented in the darkness, wondering if she'd left something on the stove. Then she heard it, the crackling roar that struck terror into every frontier dweller's heart. Fire. She threw on her wrapper and boots, rushing outside to see orange flames leaping from Caleb's barn, 2 miles distant, the glow visible even across the snowy expanse. Without thought for propriety or safety, she began running toward the inferno. Other townspeople were converging on the ranch, drawn by the deadly beacon. By the time Clara arrived, breathless and frightened, a bucket brigade had formed from the well to the barn. Caleb was at the head of it, his face grim with soot and determination. "The animals!" Clara shouted over the roar. "Got most of them out." Tom Sullivan called back, throwing another bucket. "But the fire's spreading to the feed store." Clara joined the line without hesitation. Her hands soon blistered from the rough rope handles. The heat was intense even 20 feet from the structure, and she could see they were losing the battle. "Let it go," Doc Hartley shouted. "Save the house." "No," Caleb's voice was raw. "That feed has to last till spring. Without it..." He didn't need to finish. Without feed, the animals would starve. Without animals, a rancher was finished. Clara looked around desperately. The water barrel by the chicken coop caught her eye. The rain barrels, every building has them. Understanding dawned on several faces. Men scattered to find every available water source, while the women maintained the main bucket line. Clara ran to organize the effort, her teaching skills translating surprisingly well to emergency coordination. "You three, bring those barrels, Mary. Get blankets to soak children. Stay back by the house." For an hour, they fought with everything they had. Just when it seemed the feed store would be saved, a new cry went up. "The house sparks on the house." Clara turned to see embers landing on Caleb's roof, the dry wood shingles beginning to smolder. Caleb's face went white. Everything he'd built, everything he owned, was about to be consumed. "I'll go," Clara said, already moving. "Clara, no." But she was already climbing, using the rain barrel and porch railing to reach the low-hanging eaves. Someone threw her a soaked blanket, and she beat at the smoldering spots, coughing from the smoke. Coming up, it was Timothy Sullivan, nimble as a monkey, carrying another wet blanket. Together they worked along the roof line, stamping out embers as they landed. Below, the fight for the barn was all but lost, but they'd managed to create a fire break between it and the other structures. The feed store stood charred but intact. The house would survive if they could keep the roof from catching. Clara lost track of time, focused only on the next ember, the next small victory against the flames. Her dress was ruined, her hands raw, her lungs burning from smoke, but she didn't stop. Finally, impossibly, the barn collapsed in on itself with a great crash, and the fire began to die. Without new fuel, the flames subsided to sullenly glowing embers. The danger had passed. Clara half climbed, half fell from the roof into Caleb's waiting arms. He held her tight, his whole body shaking. "Don't ever," he started, then just held her tighter. "The animals?" she asked when she could speak. "Safe, most of them. Lost 2 chickens and the old plow horse. But the cattle and Dusty are fine." "Thank God." As dawn broke gray and bitter, the full extent of the damage became clear. The barn was a total loss, along with most of Caleb's tools and tack. The feed store was damaged but salvageable. The house had suffered minor damage but stood firm. "Could have been worse," old Pete said, which was about as optimistic as anyone felt. "Question is," Tom Murphy said quietly, "how'd it start? Weren't no lightning, and you're too careful with lanterns. Caleb's jaw tightened. He led them to where the barn wall had stood, pointing to shattered glass and the distinct smell of kerosene. "Lantern thrown through the window, near as I can tell." The implications settled over the group like ash. "Boone," someone muttered. "Can't prove it," Caleb said. "But yeah, I'd bet my last $1. "The bastard," Jake Brennan said with feeling. "Pardon my language, ladies, but burning a man out, that's lower than a snake's belly." "What'll you do?" Doc Hartley asked. Caleb looked at his destroyed barn, then at Clara. "Rebuild. What else can I do?" "We'll help," Mary Two Rivers said firmly. "Barn raising. Soon as the weather clears. My husband's good with timber." "I've got spare tools," offered another voice. "Feed, too," added someone else. "Can spare a few bales." One by one, the townspeople offered what they could. Clara felt tears sting her smoke-irritated eyes. This was what community meant, not the gossips and moral guardians, but neighbors who showed up when disaster struck. "I'll speak to the marshal," Mayor Henderson said, surprising everyone. "This has gone too far. Boone can't be allowed to terrorize folks." As the crowd dispersed, Clara and Caleb stood alone among the ruins. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion and loss. "I'm so sorry," Clara whispered. "For what you saved my house, you risked your life. His voice broke slightly. "This is my fault? Boone's angry about the school board meeting. He's striking at you to get to me." Caleb turned to face her fully. "Now you listen to me. Clara Hartwell, this is Boone's doing and his alone. Don't you dare blame yourself for his evil." "But—" "No buts." He cradled her soot-stained face in his hands. "I'd face a dozen burned barns before I'd give you up. We clear on that?" Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Good. Now let's get you home and cleaned up. You look like a chimney sweep." Despite everything, Clara laughed. "You're not exactly pristine yourself. Mr. Ward." As they walked toward town, other figures emerged from the smoky dawn, men already planning the barn raising, women organizing food for the workers, children sent to gather salvageable nails and hardware from the ruins. At her cottage, Clara insisted on tending Caleb's burns and blisters before her own. He submitted to her ministrations with unusual docility, exhaustion winning over his usual independence. "Stay," she said when she'd finished. "You need rest." "Clara, people will talk. Let them. After last night, I think we've earned a little scandal." She guided him to her small sofa. "Sleep. I'll wake you in a few hours." He was asleep almost before his head hit the cushion. Clara covered him with her mother's quilt and allowed herself a moment to study his face, relaxed in sleep despite the soot and stress. This man had become her whole world so quickly it should frighten her. Instead, it felt like coming home. A knock interrupted her reverie. She opened the door to find Marshal Pike, a grizzled lawman who kept order in the territory. "Miss Hartwell, heard there was trouble at the Ward place." "Come in, Marshal. Though speak quietly, Caleb's resting." Pike's eyebrows rose at seeing Caleb asleep on her sofa, but he made no comment. Clara related the night's events, including the evidence of arson. "I'll look into it," Pike promised. "Been getting other complaints about Boone? Man's getting too big for his britches. Will anything come of it?" Pike's weathered face was grim. "Hard to prove arson, especially against a man with Boone's money and influence. But sometimes just asking questions is enough to make a man reconsider his actions." After he left, Clara sat at her small table, exhausted but unable to sleep. The fire had changed things. This wasn't just about social pressure anymore. It was about violence, intimidation, potentially deadly force. A hand on her shoulder made her jump. Caleb stood behind her, still rumpled from sleep. "You should be resting," she said. "Hard to sleep when you're thinking so loud." He sat beside her, taking her bandaged hands gently in his, having second thoughts. "No." The vehemence of her response surprised them both. "No," she said more quietly. "I'm angry, furious, but not doubtful." "That's my fierce schoolmarm," he said with a tired smile. "What if he tries again? What if next time? Then we'll face it together. The whole town, from the look of things." Boone overplayed his hand. Folks might tolerate a lot, but burning out a neighbor crosses a line. Clara leaned into his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I was so frightened when I saw the flames. The thought of losing you—" "Same." His arm came around her. "When I saw you on that roof, I aged 10 years. Promise me something." "What?" "No more roof climbing. My heart can't take it." Clara smiled, despite everything. "I'll promise if you promise not to run into any more burning buildings." "Deal." They sat in comfortable silence as the morning sun climbed higher, casting light on a world changed by fire, but not broken by it. A commotion outside made them both look up. Through the window, Clara could see wagons arriving, loaded with lumber, men with tools, women with food baskets, children carrying whatever they could manage. "What's happening?" Clara asked. Caleb's eyes widened. "They're not waiting for better weather. They're starting the barn raising today." They hurried outside to find what seemed like half the town converging on the street. Figured strike while the iron's hot. Tom Sullivan called out, "So to speak, got lumber from the mill, tools from everybody. You direct us, Caleb. We'll build." I don't know what to say." "Say where you want the cornerstone," Jake Brennan said gruffly. "Talk is cheap. Work's what matters." As the impromptu construction crew headed for Caleb's ranch, Clara felt a hand slip into hers. Amy Chen stood there, offering a small wrapped bundle. "Mama sent tea," the girl said shyly. "Special blend for smoke-sore throats." "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind. Miss Hartwell, will school still be Monday, even with Mr. Ward's trouble?" Clara knelt to the girl's level. "Nothing stops education. Amy, we'll have school as usual." The girl beamed and ran back to her mother. Clara stood to find Caleb watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "What?" "Nothing. Just—" "You're remarkable. You know that." "I'm a woman who knows what matters," Clara corrected. "And right now, what matters is getting your barn rebuilt. Shall we?" As they joined the stream of people heading to the ranch, Clara marveled at the turnabout. Weeks ago, she'd been an outsider facing suspicion and hostility. Now, because of shared crisis and common purpose, she was part of something larger. The fire had been meant to break them. Instead, it had forged them stronger, not just her and Caleb, but the entire community. "Boone's going to be furious," she murmured to Caleb. "Let him. He showed his true colors last night. Now we're showing ours." By the time they reached the ranch, the ruins had been cleared and foundation stones were being laid. The bitter winter air rang with hammers and saws, shouts and laughter. From destruction, creation. From intended evil, unexpected good. Clara rolled up her sleeves and joined the work crew, ignoring the shocked looks from some of the more traditional women. If she could fight fire in her nightdress, she could certainly help raise a barn in her work clothes. "That's my future wife," she heard Caleb say proudly to someone, and her heart soared despite the aches and exhaustion. Whatever came next, Boone's next move, winter's hardships, society's expectations, they would face it as they faced this day together, with courage and with the strength that comes from knowing you're not alone. The barn would rise again, and with it, hopes for a future where love mattered more than convention, where community meant more than conformity, and where even the harshest frontier winter couldn't freeze the warmth of human kindness. The new barn stood proud against the winter sky, its fresh-cut timber golden in the afternoon sun. 3 weeks had passed since the fire, and the community's response had transformed what could have been disaster into something approaching triumph. Clara watched from the schoolhouse window as Caleb worked with other men to hang the massive doors, their laughter carrying across the snow. "Miss Hartwell," Amy Chen's voice drew her attention back to the classroom. "Is this sum correct?" Clara checked the slate, smiling at the neat figures. "Perfect. Amy, you're really understanding long division now." The classroom hummed with quiet concentration. 22 students bent over their work, ranging from 6-year-old Samuel Morrison to 15-year-old Ruth Kowalski. The diversity that had once scandalized the town had become a source of pride for Clara children of ranchers studying alongside children of laborers. Different backgrounds, united in learning. Teacher. Young. Joseph. Two Rivers burst through the door, eyes wide with excitement. Marshal Pikes arrested Mr. Boone. The classroom erupted in chatter. Clara raised her hand for silence, though her own heart was racing. "Joseph, where did you hear this?" "Pa's at the jail now. Says Mr. Boone was stealing water rights with fake papers." Clara maintained her composure, though inside she felt a surge of hope. "Thank you for telling us. Joseph, now, everyone back to work. This is a matter for adults to handle." But concentration was impossible after that. Clara dismissed class 10 minutes early, the children streaming out chattering excitedly. She was cleaning the blackboard when familiar footsteps made her turn. Caleb filled the doorway, his face serious but with a light in his eyes she hadn't seen since before the fire. "Is it true?" she asked. "True enough. Pike's been investigating since the fire, found out Boone's been filing false claims on water rights, forging signatures. Tom Sullivan's signature on that petition against you forged. Half the concerned citizens never signed anything." Clara sank into her chair. "He forged documents just to drive me out. Not just you. Anyone who stood in his way. Pike found 7 families who've been forced off their land with fake papers." Caleb crossed to her, taking her hands. "It's over, Clara. He's finished." "What will happen to him?" "Trial in Cheyenne. Federal matter. Interfering with water rights. He'll be lucky to avoid prison." Clara should have felt vindicated, but instead she felt oddly hollow. All that destruction, all that hate, just for control. Men like Boone can't stand seeing others succeed on their own terms, especially women who dare to think for themselves. Caleb's thumb traced circles on her hand. "But he failed. You're still here, still teaching. The town's behind you now." "Behind us," Clara corrected. "Us," he agreed, smiling. "Speaking of which, Mrs. Morrison cornered me about wedding plans. Apparently, spring isn't specific enough for her social calendar." Clara laughed, the hollow feeling dissolving. "April. The wildflowers should be blooming by then." "April it is, though I'd marry you tomorrow if you'd let me." "Patience, Mr. Ward. We've scandalized the town enough for one winter." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The news of Boone's arrest spread through Sagebrush Crossing like wildfire. By evening, an impromptu celebration had begun at Murphy's store. Spilling out into the street despite the cold, Clara found herself at the center of it, accepting congratulations and apologies in equal measure. "I owe you an apology," Mrs. Henderson said stiffly. "I allowed Mr. Boone's influence to cloud my judgment." Clara recognized the effort those words cost the proud woman. "We all make mistakes, Mrs. Henderson. What matters is learning from them." "Yes, well," the mayor's wife cleared her throat. "I wondered if you might consider teaching an evening class. For adults, some of us could benefit from expanding our perspectives." Clara blinked in surprise. "I'd be honored." As Mrs. Henderson moved away, Jake Brennan took her place. The school board president looked uncomfortable but determined. "Want to make something clear," he said gruffly. "Board's unanimous. You've got the job as long as you want it. Married or not. Figure a woman brave enough to fight fires deserves to make her own choices." "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. That means more than you know." The celebration continued around them, but Clara noticed one person standing apart. Mary Two Rivers watched from the edge of the crowd, a small smile on her weathered face. Clara made her way over. "You knew, didn't you, about Boone's schemes?" "Suspected. Man like that. Greed shows in everything he does." Mary paused. "My people have a saying, the eagle that flies highest sees farthest. You flew high, Miss Hartwell, saw what others missed." "I couldn't have done it alone." "No one does anything alone. That's what Boone never understood." Mary's eyes found Caleb in the crowd. "That one understands. Why he's good for you." Before Clara could respond, the crowd's attention shifted. A wagon was approaching, loaded with what looked like furniture. As it drew closer, Clara recognized the driver, Frederick Chen, Amy's father. "Miss Hartwell," he called out. "Delivery for the schoolhouse." The wagon contained desks, 6 new desks, beautifully crafted from local pine. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "The families chipped in," Tom Sullivan explained. "Figured proper education deserves proper furniture." "I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep teaching our kids." Someone called out, "That's thanks enough." As men unloaded the desks, Caleb appeared at Clara's elbow. "Come on, let's get some air." They walked to the edge of town, where the prairie stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars. The celebration noise faded behind them, replaced by the whisper of wind through dried grass. "Overwhelming?" Caleb asked. "A little. 6 months ago, I was nobody to them. Now you're the woman who stood up to a bully and won, who risks her neck for neighbors, who treats every child like they matter." He turned her to face him. "You've changed this town. Clara changed me. You changed me too. Taught me that independence doesn't mean isolation, that strength can mean accepting help." She smiled. "That cowboys aren't nearly as gruff as they pretend to be." "Don't go ruining my reputation," he said, but he was smiling too. They stood close together, breath misting in the cold air. The future spread before them like the prairie vast, challenging, but no longer daunting. "Do you think Boone will be convicted?" Clara asked. "Pike seems confident, even if he's not. He's finished here. His creditors are already circling. Ranch will probably go to auction." "What about the families he drove off?" "Some might come back, start over." Caleb paused. "Been thinking about buying some of his land myself. That section near the river would make good grazing. Planning to expand. Planning for the future, our future." His arms came around her. "School's growing. You'll need an assistant soon. Town's growing too. Might even get a proper doctor, newspaper. Things are changing." "Not everything," Clara said. "The important things stay the same. Hard work, honesty, taking care of each other." "Love," Caleb added. "That stays the same too." "Gets stronger," Clara corrected, and kissed him under the vast Wyoming sky. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Monday morning brought a new energy to the schoolhouse. The new desks gleamed with promise, and Clara had arranged them to accommodate the 3 new students who'd enrolled, families feeling safe to send their children now that Boone's influence had waned. "Before we begin," Clara announced, "I have news. Starting next week, we'll have evening classes for adults, reading, writing, arithmetic, and history." "Will you teach about women voting?" Ruth Kowalski asked eagerly. "Among other things, education is for everyone, regardless of age or circumstances." "My ma wants to come," Timothy Sullivan said. "She never learned to read proper." "She'll be welcome." As the students settled into their lessons, Clara felt a deep satisfaction. This was what she'd envisioned when she'd left Boston, not just teaching from books, but building a community of learners, breaking down barriers of class and age and gender. At lunch, she found a package on her desk. Inside was a book, Jane Eyre, with a note in Caleb's careful hand. "Thought you might enjoy this. The heroine reminds me of someone I know." Sick. Clara hugged the book to her chest, grinning. A literate cowboy who gave romantic gifts. If the gossips only knew how far from their stereotypes the truth really was. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. A well-dressed man from Cheyenne introduced himself as Mr. Harrison, representing the Territorial Education Board. "We've heard remarkable things about your school. Miss Hartwell, innovative teaching methods, inclusive policies, exceptional results." Clara's stomach tightened. Was this another challenge? "We'd like to feature your school in our annual report. Perhaps have you speak at the Territorial Conference this summer? Other communities could benefit from your approach." Clara stared, speechless, from parish to Paragon in a matter of months. "I'm honored. Mr. Harrison, though I should tell you, I'll be married by summer, Mrs. Ward, not Miss Hartwell." "Even better," Harrison said, surprising her. "Proves marriage needn't end a woman's career. Quite progressive. Just what the territory needs." After he left, Clara sat in her empty classroom, marveling at the turn of events. She'd come west seeking purpose and found it in abundance. But more than that, she'd found home, family, love. A knock interrupted her musings. Timothy Sullivan peered in. "Miss Hartwell Ma wanted me to give you this." He handed her a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a quilt square, beautifully embroidered with a schoolhouse. A note explained it was the beginning of a wedding quilt, each family contributing a square. Clara's eyes misted. "Tell your mother it's perfect, Timothy." As the boy ran off, Clara fingered the careful stitches. Each one represented acceptance, community, belonging. The very things Boone had tried to deny her, now offered freely. She locked up carefully and walked home through the settling dusk. Lights glowed warm in windows. Families gathering for evening meals. Several people called out greetings, and Clara responded warmly. At her cottage, she found Caleb waiting on the porch, a package of his own in hand. "More gifts?" she teased. "You'll spoil me." "Just getting started," he said. "This one's practical, though." Inside was a fur-lined coat, beautifully made and exactly her size. "Winter's not over yet," he explained. "Wanted you warm." "It's perfect." She stretched up to kiss him. "Though I have excellent ways of staying warm now." "Clara Hartwell, are you scandalizing me?" "Just wait until I'm Clara Ward. Then I'll really give them something to talk about." They laughed together as the first stars appeared. Inside, Clara made coffee while Caleb built up the fire. Simple domestic tasks that presaged a lifetime of such moments. "Any word from the marshal?" she asked. "Boone's definitely going to trial. Also, 3 of the families he cheated are coming back. Peter's family is even talking about opening a newspaper." "A newspaper here? Town's growing. Might even get that railroad spur they've been promising." Caleb accepted his coffee gratefully. "Change is coming fast." "Are you ready for it? You came here for quiet isolation." "I came here to hide," he corrected. "Difference between hiding and living took me a while to learn. Good thing I had a patient teacher." "Oh, I'm very patient," Clara said with mock seriousness. "Ask any of my students." Patient and modest, too. They sat together as night deepened, planning and dreaming. The schoolhouse needed expansion. The ranch needed improvements. Their future needed building, brick by brick, day by day. "No regrets?" Caleb asked suddenly. Boston had a lot more to offer than a one-room schoolhouse and a weather-beaten rancher. Clara set down her cup and turned to face him fully. Boston had buildings and culture and comfortable lives, but it didn't have children hungry to learn, or neighbors who'd rebuild your barn, or stars you could actually see. It didn't have you. Sweet talker. Truth teller. She took his hand. "I came west looking for meaning. I found it in that classroom, in this town, in you. No regrets. Caleb, not one." He brought her hand to his lips. "How'd I get so lucky?" "A clean living and good looks." "Must be it." As the evening wore on, they talked of everything and nothing. The students' progress, the ranch plans, the wedding preparations that had the whole town buzzing. Ordinary conversations made extraordinary by love and shared purpose. When Caleb finally rose to leave, Clara walked him to the door. "April seems very far away," she said. 93 days. Not that I'm counting." "Of course not." He kissed her goodbye with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "Good night, future Mrs. Ward." "Good night, future Mr. Hartwell." "That's not how it works." "It is in my classroom." His laughter followed him into the night. Clara watched until he disappeared, then closed the door on the winter cold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new victories, new moments of grace. But tonight, she was simply a woman in love, teaching in a town that had become home, building a future that exceeded her wildest Boston dreams. The frontier had tested her and found her worthy. In return, it had given her everything: purpose, community, and a love strong enough to weather any storm. She'd needed to travel 2,000 miles to find where she belonged, but the journey had been worth every dusty, difficult step. Spring arrived in Wyoming like a shy bride, tentative at first, then bursting forth in glory. The prairie transformed from white to green almost overnight, dotted with wildflowers that painted the landscape in purple, yellow, and blue. Clara stood at her classroom window, watching her students play in the schoolyard during lunch, their laughter mixing with birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle. April had finally come, and with it, her wedding day. Miss Hartwell, Amy Chen, appeared at her elbow. "Ma says to tell you the dress is ready for final fitting." Clara smiled at her star pupil. "Thank you, Amy. Tell your mother I'll stop by after school." The past months had brought changes beyond her wildest expectations. The school now boasted 30 students. With talk of hiring an assistant teacher, the evening adult classes had proven so popular that they'd had to move to the church to accommodate everyone. Even Mrs. Henderson had become proficient in reading, though she still blushed when asked to read aloud. A teacher, Timothy Sullivan, burst through the door. "The new family's here, the Andersons from Nebraska. They got 3 kids." More students meant more validation of Clara's work. The Territorial Education Board had indeed featured her school in their report, calling it a model of progressive frontier education. Other towns had written asking for advice on establishing similar inclusive policies. But today, none of that mattered as much as the simple gold band Caleb had placed on her finger that morning during a private moment. Soon, he'd whispered, "By sunset, you'll be Mrs. Ward, and still Miss Hartwell to my students." She'd reminded him, earning that rare full smile she treasured. The afternoon passed in a blur. Clara dismissed class early, the children scattering with excited chatter about the evening's festivities. The whole town was invited to the wedding celebration, democracy in action, as Clara had insisted. At the Chen's shop, Clara stood still as Mrs. Chen made final adjustments to the cream-colored dress. It wasn't elaborate by Boston standards, but the delicate embroidery and quality fabric made it special. "You look beautiful," Mary Two Rivers said from her chair in the corner. She'd become Clara's unofficial advisor and dear friend. "Caleb won't know what hit him. He's seen me covered in soot and snow. I think he'll survive seeing me in a pretty dress." "Different kind of survival," Mary said wisely. The church bells began ringing at 5 o'clock, their bronze voices carrying across the valley. Clara made her way to the church, accompanied by her makeshift family, the Chens, the Two Rivers, the Sullivans, and others who'd become dear to her. Inside, the church was transformed. Wildflowers filled every available space, their sweet scent mixing with beeswax candles. The pews were packed, the entire town turning out to witness the union of their schoolteacher and the rancher who'd captured her heart. But Clara had eyes only for the man waiting at the altar. Caleb stood tall and strong in his best suit, his gray eyes warm with emotion as she walked toward him. Reverend Morrison beamed at them both, his own wife dabbing at her eyes in the front pew. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, "we gather today to witness something special, not just the union of 2 people, but the joining of 2 souls who've found in each other the courage to build something greater than themselves." Clara barely heard the familiar words, lost in Caleb's steady gaze. When it came time for vows, he spoke clearly, his voice carrying to every corner. "Clara, you came into my life like spring after the longest winter. You showed me that living means more than just surviving, that opening your heart again isn't weakness, but the greatest strength. I promise to support your dreams, to stand beside you in every storm, and to love you until the mountains themselves crumble." Clara's voice was thick with emotion as she responded. "Caleb, you gave me shelter when I was lost, strength when I was weak, and love when I'd almost given up on finding it. I promise to be your partner in all things, to build our life with joy and purpose, and to love you beyond the last star fades." "The rings," Reverend Morrison prompted. "Joseph, Two Rivers stepped forward proudly with the rings on a small cushion. The bands were simple but perfect, his grandfather's and her mother's. Symbols of love that transcended time and distance. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was tender, a promise sealed before God and community. The church erupted in cheers and applause, children throwing wild flower petals as Clara and Caleb made their way back down the aisle. Outside, tables had been set up in the churchyard, laden with food contributed by every family. Musicians tuned their instruments while children ran between the adults' legs, excitement crackling in the air. Mrs. Ward, Doc Hartley called out. First dance belongs to you two. The fiddler struck up a waltz, and Caleb led Clara to the makeshift dance floor. She'd worried he might be awkward, but he moved with surprising grace. Where did you learn to dance? She asked. Man's gotta have some secrets, he said, spinning her expertly. Besides, couldn't have my wife showing me up at our own wedding. Your wife, Clara repeated, savoring the words. I like the sound of that. Better get used to it. I plan on saying it often. Other couples joined them on the floor, and soon the whole gathering was alive with music and movement. Clara danced with Doc Hartley, Tom Sullivan, even Jake Brennan, who'd become one of her strongest supporters on the school board. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Marshall Pike called for attention. Got news from Cheyenne, he announced. Silas Boone was convicted on all charges, 10 years in federal prison, and his assets are being distributed to the families he cheated. Another cheer went up. Justice served. Wrongs righted. Clara felt Caleb's arm come around her waist, solid and reassuring. It's over, he murmured. Really over. No, Clara corrected. It's just beginning. Timothy Sullivan approached shyly. Mrs. Ward, I wrote something. For you and Mr. Ward. The boy cleared his throat and began to recite. When winter winds blow cold and harsh, and hope seems lost in snow, a teacher's light can pierce the dark and make the prairie glow. She came from far beyond the hills, with books and dreams held high. She taught us more than words and sums. She taught us how to fly. Clara's eyes filled with tears as Timothy finished. That was beautiful. Timothy, thank you. The boy beamed and scampered off. Other students approached throughout the evening, offering drawings, pressed flowers, small tokens of appreciation that meant more than gold. As the celebration continued around them, Clara and Caleb found a quiet moment by the church steps. Any regrets? Clara asked, echoing his question from months before. Only one, Caleb said seriously. Clara's heart skipped. What? That I waited so long to kiss you that first time. She swatted his arm, laughing. Beast. You're beast now, Mrs. Ward. Always. Mary, Two Rivers approached, carrying a wrapped bundle. Wedding gift from the tribal families, she said, with our blessings. Inside was a stunning blanket, woven with symbols of unity, strength, and new beginnings. Clara held it reverently. It's beautiful. Thank you. Mary smiled. For your new home. May it always be warm. The new home. Caleb had spent the winter months adding to his cabin, creating a proper house for them to share. Clara would keep her cottage in town for nights when weather made travel impossible. But the ranch would be their true home. Ready to see it? Caleb asked as the celebration began to wind down. Clara nodded. They made their farewells amid much good-natured teasing and well-wishes. Someone had decorated Caleb's wagon with ribbons and flowers, and tin cans clattered behind as they drove away. The ride to the ranch was peaceful. The prairie bathed in moonlight. Clara leaned against Caleb's shoulder, contentment flowing through her like warm honey. There it is, Caleb said as they crested the hill. The house stood proudly in its grove of cottonwoods, windows glowing with lamplight. He'd painted it white with green shutters, and a porch wrapped around two sides. But what made Clara gasp was the small addition on the east side. "Is that—" "A library," Caleb confirmed. "Figured a teacher needs books. Lots of books." Clara threw her arms around him, nearly upsetting the wagon. "It's perfect. You're perfect." "Far from perfect," he said, but his smile was bright in the moonlight. "Just a man who loves his wife." Inside, the house was simple but beautiful. Handmade furniture, Clara's mother's quilt on the bed. Shelves waiting to be filled with books and memories. The library already held a starter collection, including the complete works of Shakespeare and Jane Austen. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ward," Caleb said softly. Clara turned in his arms, her heart so full she couldn't speak. Instead, she showed him with kisses, with touches, with the promise of all the tomorrows stretching ahead. Later, as they sat on the porch watching stars wheel overhead, Clara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A proper Boston lady would be scandalized. Married to a rancher, living on the frontier, insisting on continuing to teach despite her wedded state. But Clara had learned that proper was just another word for afraid. Afraid to change, afraid to challenge, afraid to truly live. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "About how the cowboy thought he needed a quiet life for the winter," she said, smiling up at him. "But the feisty schoolteacher made him lose control." "Best thing that ever happened to him," Caleb said, kissing her temple. Turns out quiet was overrated. And control. Who needs control when you have love? They sat in comfortable silence. The night sounds of the prairie a gentle symphony around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Students to teach, a ranch to run, a community to serve. There would be more winters, more storms, more tests of their resolve. But they would face them together, with the strength that comes from choosing love over fear, community over isolation, hope over despair. "I love you, Mr. Ward." Clara said, "I love you, Mrs. Ward." Above them, a shooting star traced silver across the sky, a blessing, a promise, a new beginning written in light. The cowboy had found his peace not in silence, but in partnership. The schoolteacher had found her purpose not just in teaching, but in building a life rooted in love and service. Together, they'd proven that the harshest frontier could bloom with possibility when tended with courage and care. And in a small schoolhouse in Sagebrush Crossing, children would continue to learn their letters and numbers. But more importantly, they'd learn that change was possible, that love could conquer prejudice, and that even in the wildest places, civilization meant more than buildings and rules. It meant people choosing to be better, together. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Please comment below and share where you're listening from so we can connect and discuss what you thought about Clara and Caleb's journey. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like. And don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover these frontier tales of love, courage, and new beginnings. Your support means the world and helps bring more stories to life.